When I think about leadership, I think it is important in the context of Canada and the business community is to focus in on what do you think CEO's job is. I remember once we had a dinner thing that I've tried to sponsor is when the CEOs change of the Canadian banks. We invite all the old CEOs back and we have all the existing CEOs and we kind of celebrate the person who's going off into the sun. And I asked everyone go around the room and say, what do you think your job is? And it was interesting to see the range of views, but I would say the dominant view was that we are custodians of great financial institutions, great institutions in Canada, and our job is to build franchises that will be sustainable for decades to come. And that is your fundamental core mission, is to hand the institution off to someone in better shape than you got it because someone did that for you and set you up for success. And I do think that's incredibly important. It may sound like, oh yeah, sure, everyone buys into that. But I would actually say there's been a wave of no shareholder value added literature that really in the financial services industry has been translated as your job is to make yourself personally as rich as you can in the shortest period of time and get out of town. And I think we saw over the last 3 or 4 years the actual consequence of that is people taking that as a mission statement, but they wrap themselves in the flag of, well, I was just looking after the shareholders. And I think, yes, you have to look after the shareholders, but the first thing you have to do is produce a sustainable franchise for your country and for your shareholders. So when you come to sort of say, well, how do you do that? How do you create sustainable franchises? Obviously, there's an element of you have to make some pretty critical decisions that matter and that turn out to be the right decisions. Certainly for us, if you said what's the decision that we're always working on is how fast to grow. I believe that you can't have an institution that doesn't grow, and so if you say, I'm not going to have a growth agenda, usually that means you have a stall agenda and you have a decline agenda. But on the other hand, we also know in financial services that speed kills. And if you want to know where the risk is in your organization, you should always ask, well, where's the growth of my organization? Because that's where you're going to find in fact, the risk. And so as a leader, you're trying to get the organization to grow, but you're also trying to figure out when do you modulate and say, you know, we don't have the capacity to grow at this pace. Let's take it and slow this down and have a more moderate pace because that will produce a more sustainable outcome. I'd say the second issue is to actually understand what your business has capabilities, where its competitive edge is. One of the things I try to say inside our organization is there's lots of ways to make money in financial services. You just have to figure out how you know how to make money. And so this may be counter to what's being taught here, so probably half of what I'm going to say is counter. But I think people look too much at their competitors. And they end up imitating, trying to say, well, if my competitor's doing that, then I should do that. As if your competitor's doing that, that's where your competitive edge lies. Maybe your competitive edge lies in somewhere else. And so set yourself the goal, like in our case, what we've said to our shareholders, we can grow your earnings per share 7 to 10% every year, and if there's a financial crisis, we won't blow up. That's our promise to you. Now that won't necessarily produce 25% share increases in some years. It's a steady state kind of model, and you say, that's what we know how to run. We do not know how to run highly volatile businesses. We don't have the stomach for it. But someone else might say, I do know how to run those. And that doesn't mean their strategy is worse or better, it's just different. And having the discipline of saying in your organization, we don't have the competency to do that, and keep your organization from what I call strategic drift. Well, everyone's doing this, why don't we do it? Say, no, but that's not what we know how to do. I think the third thing that I think you CEOs have to do is always this balance between the short term and the long term. Yes, we do have a requirement, in my view, essential requirement to say we're producing a sustainable organization over the long run. But I think you can kid yourself if you don't think you also have to manage the short run. Because if you don't carry your shareholders for the short run, you won't be here in the long run to, in fact, deliver that vision. And so the toughest act all the time is saying, what's the kind of performance I need to deliver in the short run that will essentially keep my shareholders at bay, make them satisfied, while investing as much as I can in building a great franchise for the long run. And having your organization always see those two as you have to do both. The answer is, well, tell me, and you'll often get from young execs, well, tell me what you want. And I say, yep, you got it, both. And that's why you get paid the bucks you get paid, because you have to figure out how to handle that problem. Clearly, business mix is very fundamental. And so I think in many cases, trying to decide whether you want to be a monoline or whether you want to have diversity, and what's the diversity you want to have. Do you want to be concentrated geographically, or do you want to be, in fact, a global company, and what countries you want to go in turn out to be pretty decisive things, decisions that you make that will determine, in a sense, your performance. And equally, I would say acquisitions. If you asked, what are the two things that bring financial institutions down? Their concentration of risk, so you're over-concentrated in risk, and they were bad acquisitions. And so when you're doing those are the things where you're making those core decisions. You have to be, as a CEO, held accountable for what those decisions are. I'd say if you said, what's the evolution in my mind, which is what I want to get into, of what it takes, though, to be a great leader, is that I think in general we're moving, and certainly at TD dramatically have moved, is that you are not looking for the great leader who can brilliantly answer every one of those questions. And so the theory that what you just have to do is find this perfect CEO who's got that great judgment, they get it right all the time, in my view, is a very dangerous theory. Because in fact, if you look at the banks that went down, they all had great leaders. And they all had a string of successful calls. And then they went one step too far and they took their institutions down. So in fact, what was missing? What was missing was a culture of challenge, a culture of transparency, and a team around them that in fact felt empowered to say, no, this is crazy. We shouldn't be doing this. There's something fundamentally wrong in the business judgment against the great leaders. So I come with a quite strong bias against the great leader theory, and I think it's a dangerous phenomena if you build organizations around the great leaders. What really great leaders do is produce great teams and great cultures of pushback and transparency. That's what should be the ultimate measure of a great leader. But I think they have to do more than that. I think they have to, one of the things that we've certainly learned is TD, if you think about TD, and TD is very much a brand company, very much a marketing company, and brand is really trying to create an employee experience that you can deliver on a consistent basis across multiple channels and businesses and now geographies. And I think if I had the biggest learning for me was that you had to spend the equal amount of energy in creating an employee brand. Because if you were going to, in fact, execute that strategy, what you had to do is attract people, not just competent people, but attract people that actually bought into the culture that produced that sustainable performance over time. And instinctively on all the questions that we have, we get to the right answer. Because in our case, because we're heavily a retail bank, actual decision making is made, in fact, down at the bottom of the organization, not at the top. And so the real challenge is how do you get all of that thinking down in the organization so everyone says, I get what the strategy is, I get what the culture is, and I know more about this area than the people at the top who don't really know very much about anything, and I know how to translate what they're talking about into the right decision for my area. I think in doing that, of course, that drives you down a whole set of paths, and in our particular case, diversity has been a huge issue that I've been heavily involved in driving, because it's obvious if you're a growth company where you think getting the right people is important, then it's absolutely essential for your survival that you be able to recruit the best people, and you can make each person inside the organization the best person that they could be. And that means attacking all the implicit or explicit barriers to both attracting and growing people inside your organization. But the other issue that over time, we've gradually realized is the big challenge for us, is that the nature of our business is actually intensifying the detailed product knowledge that people have to do their jobs. And so it used to be that I think people could say, well, I'm a general manager in the bank, I think I could run anything. And now you say, well, I'm not sure I could run the credit derivatives trading group, or I'm not sure I could actually do the credit scoring for credit card portfolio. And as you go through, each of our businesses have become more knowledge intensive. At the same time, what's obvious, if you go back over in the sense of what producing great leaders is, the actual skill that differentiates whether people are going to be successful or not in the organization are not those technical skills, they're actually people skills. Is someone a person who can have a vision and sell that vision into a large population that's working for them? Can they translate what our principles are into ideas that seize the people inside the organization? Can they attract people? One of the things we look at when we look at leaders and say, does everybody in the organization, do they die to go work for this person, or do they have to be assigned to go work for this person? And quickly you see, well, some people you have to assign people for, and other people, everybody wants to go work for that person. Are people, when they work for this person, always better than before they went and worked for the person? And does this person have an ability to export people to other parts of the organization, and do the people they export turn out to be highly successful people in the organization? These are the skills that you actually need to be successful. And the problem that, in a sense, all of us as large organizations confront is that you have this intensity of saying, well, no, but people first establish their credentials inside very narrow product silos. And how do you then produce general managers that can oversee wide parts of the company and then have these people skills given the intensity of the product knowledge that we're demanding that they achieve? And I'd say, if you say, what's the dilemma of modern leadership, is to find ways in your organization that you can teach those people skills or grow those people skills, and at the same time teach people broader understanding of the businesses so they can move around the business, so you can eventually create leaders that can manage multiple units across multiple geographies and jurisdictions. Did anything in my career then lead me to be able to do that? Is I think Roger's question. So one of the things whenever I talk, we have the incoming MBA class, is the first thing I'd say is, all this stuff they tell you about managing your career, forget. It's not a good idea. And it's not a good idea, first, because it's not possible. And secondly, it's not a very good idea because when I look at someone who spends all their time managing their career, I smell politics, and I say, we don't like politics. I like someone who just actually gets the job done. And so I would say, I think there's an over-concentration on career management and not enough concentration on saying, why don't I just do a great job and be a great leader that everybody wants to hire me and get me, and my career will take care of themselves. If you look at my career, I would say I've probably gone to the other end of the spectrum of career management, but just to run through it, I had quite a different variety, so I'm not sure I'm a good prototype of what I would suggest to people. But one of the things I do say to people is, wherever you are, even if you have a terrible leader, that leader will do something better than you do. And try to figure out what that is and learn from that leader. And even if you work in an organization that's badly run, there'll be some part of that organization that is in fact doing something, and try to figure what that is. So if you look at my career and say, I was in the government for 10 years, and there's lots that's wrong about how the government's run. But what did I learn out of those 10 years? Well, you're in an organization at the time in which you couldn't hire, fire, or reward people. And yet, people would work 7 days a week, 52 weeks a year, and be incredibly dedicated. And why? Because you sold them a mission. You sold them a vision. You found ways to inspire them that weren't monetary. Now, in my particular case, I left that to go to the other end of the spectrum and to go to Merrill Lynch. That even within the financial services industry had a culture that was extreme on just, here's the bucks, now shut up and do what we're asking you to do, culture, and use financial rewards to, in fact, be the key way in which you drove behavior. But the thing I did learn from Merrill Lynch was, if you think about governments are organizations that spend all their time trying to figure out what they should do, not whether they can do it. And there's, in my view, a false belief that because the Queen is sovereign, you can do anything you want, you just have to pass a law, so then you have these long debates about what the right thing to do is. If you're running an entrepreneurial organization like Merrill Lynch, your job is, what can we do? And so the guns tend to be forced to the outside rather than the inside. And you grow a group of people who actually genuinely believe that if you took them in an airplane, gave them a parachute and $10 and dropped them in the middle of Australia, when you came back a year later, they'd be millionaires. And that attitude of, okay, I can figure out by going outward, was something that I definitely learned when I was at Merrill Lynch. If I think I did a rescue of a company called Financial Trustco. And there we had a team working on that for 3 years, all of whom knew that the end game was going to be that they all lost their jobs. Every single person in the head office was going to lose their jobs. And so what was critical was that they believed that, one, that this was worth doing, and two, that we were going to do it together, and that everybody in the end would be treated fairly, and that would be treated in a very transparent way. And it's always astounding, if you do that with humans, what they're prepared to do. When I went from there to Canada Trust, what I certainly learned was the power of the brand, is that you could have this little company that understood, had a brand in Canada. We had a slogan, 8 to 8, 6 days straight. And what was astounding was that that was invented in 1976, and they stopped marketing it in 1986. And in 1996 was still the most well-known marketing lingo in Canada, 10 years later, having never marketed at all. That's what a brand is, that you imprinted on people that this was a different kind of institution. And that's something that we brought to TD. And then when I went to TD, I clearly learned the power of risk, that if you get the risk wrong, you blow up. If you get the risk right, you have a huge competitive advantage. And so in having a culture where people really instinctively understood the business decisions to be made or not, turned out, as we went into the financial downturn, to make a tremendous difference. So my broad statement is, when it's just a step back, what does all this mean to me? Leadership is changing. It's less about finding the perfect individual than finding leaders that can surround them with teams of great people who can inspire other people, can attract other people, who own the cultural value systems of the institution and genuinely focus not so much as what is this going to do for me tomorrow, is I'm going to get I know I'll get the financial rewards, but I'll get the psychic rewards out of building great institutions, not just for the shareholders, but for the country. And I think if you think in those terms, it tells you what the answer is to a lot of public policy questions that are debated. So I'll stop there and open it up.